Hey, you ever feel like the bad guy in a story until something worse walks in? Tonight's tale is about a man who thought he was the monster until the real one joined him for a ride. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how many of you are up with me this late. And if dark stories like this keep your eyes open at night, make sure to like and subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Now, buckle up. This one's going off the edge of the map. It was 3:17 a.m. at the Waffle House. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve and pushed the table away from my fat belly, the metal chair scraping the greasy floor. I had time to kill until the next job, so I headed out to the parking lot to make my way to the nearest motel. I hadn't come through this town yet, so no one should recognize me there, I figured. Stumbling with my bum leg past the dumpsters, I about had a damn heart attack when the lid slammed. I shook my head and kept going. Another slam. Rage boiled over me. I stopped to glare back at the dumpsters, waiting to see which methed-out employee had been responsible. The wood doors around the dumpsters creaked in the night wind, closing themselves slowly. Another slam, and the door popped open. Looking like he'd kicked it open with his foot, the employee strolled out carelessly, whistling a jolly little tune, even. I rolled my shoulders and huffed. This fucker was about to learn some respect. I cracked my knuckles and headed back towards him. "Hey!" I shouted. He stopped, startled. I closed the distance and grabbed a fistful of his greasy black apron. He was mid-40s maybe, but looked 80. He had the classic sunken eyes and leathery skin of hard living or drugs. He just stood there, mouth agape, like the stupid animal he was. I wanted to knock out his nasty black teeth. "Do you have any idea?" "Hey, you there!" Another voice interrupted me. The other man leaned against the building by the door, one hand in his pocket and the other smoking a cigarette. I must have been too angry to have noticed him before. "I've been looking for a truck driver," he said. My grip on the employee tightened in rage. He was shaking now. "Excuse me?" I yelled back. "I could use a ride," the man said calmly, "if you'd be so kind." Getting a better look at him, I was more confused. He wasn't an employee. He didn't have the stupid black apron. He wore dusty boots, raggedy jeans, and a gray zip-up jacket. But his face was what interested me. Young, bright eyes, pale and smooth skin, blonde, like a halo around his head. My anger was replaced by something else, something darker. I threw the employee to the ground. "Get lost," I told him. He scrambled away, where to I didn't care to look. My focus was on someone else now. I made my way to the other man, wary but interested. "You ain't got fucking family to help you?" I asked. He was pretty, too pretty, like one of those weird celebrities with two perfect faces. I couldn't look away. Surely someone would miss him if something happened to him. "Nope," he answered, stomping out his cigarette. "There's no one to care." He picked up the cigarette butt and flicked it into the can beside him. Like he didn't want to litter. Like that one cigarette would really make a difference. "'Cept you, maybe," he said with a smile and a wink. "Maybe I can convince you to care." Something about him felt charming, playful, a little ray of life in this hellhole. He didn't belong here. Of course, neither did the others I'd picked up. I just had one question. "How old are you?" I asked. Those blue eyes looked me up and down, studying me. Not in a nervous manner, but something else. It made me a little uncomfortable, but not enough for me to care. 19, he said after a pause. The darkness stirred again. This was too good to be true. "I've got a little cash on me," he said. "I'm sure we could work something out." I had already decided the minute I saw him. "Fine," I told him. "Hurry up." He smiled, a little too wide. "You're too kind," he said. I scoffed. "Yeah, but I'm a real saint." "So, where you headed?" I asked as we settled into the cab. "Anywhere's better than here," he said. I stifled a smile. It was funny when they said things they'd regret. "You really got no one out here? Not family, not a girlfriend, nothing?" He paused to think. then leaned a little closer, a wry, shit-eating grin on that perfect face. You really think I'd be in your truck if I did? I chuckled openly at that one. Yeah, okay, you got me there. Well, it's gonna be a while till the next stop, I warned him. Perfect, he said, settling into his seat. Maybe I will have a friend by the end of this. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, whatever, I said. His weird sense of humor was a nice change of pace, I thought. This ride might actually be enjoyable. I usually didn't enjoy their company until they were hogtied in the back. Last gas 103 miles. The sign read. Another hour, and we'd be at the spot I'd picked out. You ever get scared out here? His voice startled me. It sounded different, distorted almost. I chalked it up to the altitude fucking with my ears. It was the first thing he had said in maybe 30, 40 minutes. I had actually thought he was sleeping. He had been awfully quiet ever since we'd gotten off the main roads. I ain't scared of nothing, kid, I told him. Come on. Everybody gets scared. He pushed on, leaning closer to me like he had a secret. Sometimes it's even fun to be scared. Now that was funny. I'd have to tease him about that later. Why the hell would I be scared out here? Well, for starters, he said, there's no one else around. No one to see you, no one to hear you, no one to help you. I was chuckling now too, shaking my head. That was kind of the point of this, kid. Nothing but the pines and the fog off the creek, he continued. Well, the fog is annoying, I'll give you that, I said. I can't tell you how many times a fucking deer just pops out and smears itself all over the windshield. Even then, the fog was so thick I couldn't see but maybe a single car length in front of us. The truck lights only made it worse. I powered through up the hills like I always did. There were never any other vehicles on that road. Ah, the poor deer, he said. They used to have more natural predators out here, but they were all driven off a long, long time ago. Something was off about him. Different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the warm and sunny act he'd put on earlier was gone. He felt cold now, distant, a little creepy even. It didn't matter. We were almost there. We sat in silence for another little while. I kept my eyes to the fog swirling in the headlights. He kept his eyes locked on me, staring, without a word, like I'd vanish if he even fucking blinked. Hell, maybe he was getting scared now. He had every right to, after all. The air in the cab got colder. It was supposed to be a warm night, I thought. Condensation built up on the window from the sudden change. I flipped the wipers on, sighing as they made that god-awful, nails-on-a-chalkboard screech with every swipe. The biggest spider I've ever seen in my life crawled out of the air vent. Holy shit. It was the size of my fucking fist, hairy and dark with yellow stripes on its legs. I'm a proud man, not afraid of much. But I don't fuck around with goddamn tarantulas. I nearly lost control of the truck trying to whack it back to whatever hell it came from. Silently, without even so much as a flinch, the other man placed his pale, smooth hand atop the dash. Palm up, like an offering. My mouth hung open as the spider went into his palm, and just as quickly, into his zip-up jacket. I almost couldn't speak. What the fucking was that, man? I stammered. I swear to God if that's your fucking pet. It's not, he said calmly. Unless it wants to be. I was going to explode. Surely, I would stroke out any minute. And it looks to be a tiger wolf spider. But I'm not an entomologist. Take that thing out of your pocket now, I demanded. He took out the spider calmly, like it was a pack of smokes, like any of this was normal. Looking at it the second time was almost worse. I squinted my eyes and looked away to the road. Kill that fucking thing. You'd like that, wouldn't you? The voice wasn't his. It was a woman's hers from last week. I glanced over. She was in the passenger seat again. Tiny. Frail like a bird. A little button nose and blue eyes. Yellow blonde hair. The skin on half her face was gone to gory bone, including a hollow eye socket. The spider climbed into it. What the fuck? I slammed on the brakes. The truck skid to a stop as I caught my breath. I looked around, frantically. The young man looked groggy, bewildered. He rubbed his eyes and ran his hands through his hair. "How long was I out?" he asked. What the fuck are you talking about?" My heart thumped in my ears, my throat was dry, and my body soaked in sweat. I was shaking. The man was calm, half asleep, looking at me like I had two heads. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a pack of smokes. "No spider. You want to take a break?" he asked me, concern in his soft voice. This didn't make sense. "Where's the goddamn spider?" I demanded. He jolted upright, looking in his seat and around the cab. "There's a spider in here? Where?" I ran my clammy hands over my face, rubbing my eyes. I looked around the cab. Everything looked normal. The young man just blinked at me, like an innocent little doe in headlights, hand still outstretched with the pack of smokes. I ripped the pack from his hands. "We're taking a break," I said. "Cool," he said, disinterested. He started to follow me out of the truck. "No, you wait inside," I snapped. "Alrighty," he chimed back. I stepped out into the humid, foggy air. The temperature shocked me. It had been so much colder in the cab, I must have turned the damn AC on and not known it. This wasn't the spot I usually took them to, but it was close enough, far away enough where no one could see or hear anything. Just like that stupid kid said. It would do just fine, and I could just drive his body out farther to where I usually dump them. But after that weird dream, I wasn't sure I wanted to go where the other ones were. Maybe I would just carve out a new spot here, I thought. I was around the back mixing up 2 special cups of joe when I heard the passenger door open and close. I went back around quickly. God damn it, I said stay in the... No one was there. The truck lights flickered and a cold chill shook my body. I peered through the fog, but there was nothing. Maybe I was going a little crazy. Maybe I was just tired. I took the mugs back to the inside of the cab and carefully handed the correct one to the man beside me. "Coffee?" I asked. "I'm not a coffee person," he said politely. "Everyone says that until they have my coffee." I winked. He laughed and shook his head. "You're terrible," he said, grinning wide with those perfect teeth. I watched him absolutely gulp his coffee down like a sick, dying camel. Confused, I took a small sip of mine. It nearly burned my lip clean off. Weird. But at least it wouldn't take as long to work, I figured. "So what's your story?" I asked him, realizing I never played the get-to-know-you game that I usually slog through with my passengers. "Oh, I'm just an old soul passing through," he said. "My story's a long one. I don't think we'd have the time to cover it if we tried." "See that? You're so young, but you talk like an old fucking man," I chuckled. "I mean, where do you get that? Where are you from?" "Well, my ex-girlfriend thought I was from the depths of hell." He sat his mug down, completely finished with it, but I assured her I'm Catholic. I laughed at his joke, a little too loud. I sipped my coffee. "Women, eh?" "I thought she was an angel." "I still do," he said. "But now, I doubt she could even walk into church without bursting into flames." I slapped my knee, doubling over. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed so hard. My cheeks were warm. "You're too young to be having fucking women problems," I told him. He murmured, "but just the right age to die." I blinked. "Huh? That's the perfect age, isn't it?" he said. 18 to 21? Blonde hair, blue eyes, no one to miss them? I stammered. My thoughts were clunky. I hadn't realized how dizzy I was getting. Number. That wasn't possible. I made the coffee myself. I gave him the coffee myself. He downed it in seconds. The cab was freezing cold again. My head spun, my thoughts racing. The air was humid, my mouth so dry it felt glued together. I was spacing out, losing time. Suddenly, I was in the back of the truck on the cot, where he was supposed to be. The fog rolled in with me. Against it he stood, at the edge of the open truck, a dark shape in the night. "You know, Father Romano says I shouldn't harm anything with a soul," he said. The distortion was back in his voice, like an old, corrupted mixtape. He was holding rope in his hand. "And to tell you the truth," he continued, "I've always had a soft spot for animals, so I've never liked hurting them." In a blink, he was next to me, tying off my arm, like a tourniquet. "But you don't have a soul, do you?" He was in my face, inches away, so close he blurred. "And you're worse than an animal because you know better." Tears rolled down my face, the sheer thunder of his voice shaking me to my core. It was unnatural, ungodly. "Why did you do it?" His voice was soft, calm, as harmless as it had been before. "Why did you kill all those poor little girls and boys? And to leave their bodies like that, dumped so unceremoniously in my backyard?" He shook his head at me, frowning. "At least I kill for a reason." His limbs began snapping, loud pops as they twisted, contorted, grew taller and longer. A black shadow overtook his body, erasing all trace of his humanity in a blink, like he had never had skin or clothes or even a face to begin with. There was nothing, only a dark shape remained, made of long, twisted muscle and bone, shaped like some bastardized version of a man with horns. Then, a smile appeared. That wide smile, so perfect and sharp. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I tried to stay awake, but I was fading fast. The figure launched towards me on all fours, moving like a spider on its freaky limbs. It was over top of me in seconds. God, I'm so hungry. His face was almost pressed against mine, bared teeth dripping saliva onto my nose and mouth. I felt nothing. He rose back up in a blink, standing upright, legs bending to fit in the trailer. He wiped his mouth carefully and ran a clawed hand through the silhouette of his once beautiful hair, right between his horns. He sighed. "But I have to be patient," he said softly. "You need to last a while. I suppose I'll pick you apart, piece by piece, rationing your disgusting body." His face was in front of mine again, grinning. "And then when I'm done making you useful, I'm not going to kill you. Oh no, that's too easy for you." Everything was fading fast, patches of black closing in on me. He grabbed my face with a clawed hand, pulling me close to make sure I heard every word. "I'm going to dump your limbless body with all the people you've killed, way out here in the pines. You can use your fucking teeth to dig your way out of the mud, choking on it like you deserve." He dropped my face, my head slamming back down. Everything went dark. I prayed I wouldn't wake up again. Not to this. But my prayers never meant much, and I knew from my sins that the drugs were only temporary. Story 2. The report lay on my desk. The words were printed there in stark black ink. Domestic disturbance. 14 Seabird Lane. Cormorant's Perch Island. And below were the names. Elias and Alara Vance. "A domestic on the perch? That's a new one," I said, and the springs of my chair groaned under my weight. "They usually handle their own business." Sergeant O'Malley worked his crossword and did not look up. He had a face creased with a permanent judgment against the world and all its doings. Noise complaint came from their nearest neighbor, Old Man Hemlock. Said they were going at it loud enough to scare the gulls off his roof. A lot of smashing, apparently. The Vances haven't been answering the line since. He raised his head, and in his eyes you could see the pale, flat blue of a winter sky over a dead ocean. "You're up, Harper." "Me? Don't you think sending a familiar face like Gibbs might be better? Those folks are particular." "Gibbs has got a multi-car pile up on the causeway," O'Malley said. "And you need to learn how to deal with the particulars if you ever want to make a career in this coastal jurisdiction. It's just a lover's quarrel. Go over there, knock some heads, tell them to keep it down, and be back before lunch." He nodded with his chin toward the pistol on my hip. "And you know the islanders' rules about mainland formalities. Leave that here. It spooks them. You want me to go to an island known for its hostility to outsiders, to mediate a potentially violent domestic dispute, unarmed? It's not hostile. It's private," he said. "And they're not savages, Alex. They're fishermen and farmers who want to be left alone. A uniform is authority enough. Now go." I rose and unclipped the sidearm from my belt. The island was a 20-minute boat ride from mainland. The 100 or so that lived there lived by their own reckonings. They schooled their children in a one-room house and sent them out onto the water when they came of age. They bartered and they kept to themselves, and they only crossed to the mainland for what the island couldn't provide. They had their own laws and an old man to speak them, and for their trouble to find its way to our desks on the mainland meant the trouble was serious. The deck of the ferry was cold beneath my feet. A low gray mist lay upon the water and shrouded all things from sight. It muffled the drone of the engine and swallowed the world until the mainland dissolved into a smear of gray behind us. The perch grew out of the void ahead, a dark upthrust of rock and pine that clawed at the sky. Then you could see the houses, bleached white things that clung to the stone or clustered near the harbor like seafoam caught in a crevice. An old woman sat hunched on a bench in a thick wool shawl. She was the only other soul aboard, and she looked at the water and not at me, and she did not speak. When the ferry groaned and nudged the dock timbers, I was the only one to stand. I stepped onto the wet wood, and the air was another air altogether. The salt of it, and the reek of pine, and the smoke of wood fires burning somewhere beyond the stony rise. An older quiet was here. No sound of cars, no human call, just the wind and the gulls. Some men in oilskins and heavy sweaters worked on nets by a beached boat. Their hands moved with a slowness that bespoke a world without clocks. They stopped their work to watch me come ashore, and their eyes read the blue uniform, and then they turned away. No word. I looked at a faded map that was nailed to a post by the dock. Seabird Lane was at the far end of the village, and I set out on that path. The houses were old things, built to stand against the wind and the sea, scrubbed clean against the rot, and nets lay draped on fences like grave shrouds. There were gardens starved by the salt wind but still showing color. I saw faces in the dark glass of windows, pale specters that watched my passing and then were gone. And then I saw the house, 14 Seabird Lane. It was a cottage like the others, but set apart from them. In the garden, a clay pot lay shattered upon the stone walk, and its dark soil was spilled out amongst the ruin of red flowers. Through a window left open to the wind, I could hear the sounds. A man's low rumble and a woman's sharp answer. They were still at it. I drew a lungful of cold air to ready myself, and I knocked my fist against the door. Inside, all sound stopped. A long quiet. Then the door groaned on its hinges and opened into the dark of the house. The man who stood in the doorframe was a wall of bulk and weathered hide that filled the space of the door. He wore a beard, and his hands were the size of quarry stones, stained about the quicks of his nails with a blackness like engine grease or old blood. This would be Elias Vance. His eyes held a hard light, but when they fell upon the blue of my uniform, some of that light seemed to fail, leaving behind what might have been shame or only surprise. In the dimness of the house beyond him, a woman stood with her arms crossed over her. Her hair was red, and it was twisted up in a knot at the back of her head. On the floorboards near her feet lay a broken plate. "Elias Vance?" I said. "I'm Detective Alex Harper, from the mainland precinct. We received a complaint about a disturbance." He gave a noise in his throat that was not a word and stepped back from the door. I entered into a smell of brine and stewed herbs and some other scent beneath that was the scent of the house itself, of old wood and old sorrows. The space was neat, except for the evidence of their war. The broken plate, a stool overturned on its side, and on the stairs that climbed into the darkness of the second floor, a boy sat watching us with wide and unnervingly still eyes. "There's no need for mainland business here," Alara Vance said. "My husband and I were having a private discussion. That gossip Hemlock should learn to mind his own business." "A discussion that involves breaking things and shouting loud enough for your neighbors to hear is no longer private, ma'am," I said. "I do not want to put this in a report. I only want to know what happened and see that everyone is okay. Is anyone hurt?" Elias stared at the floorboards and his jaw was tight. It was the woman who spoke. "He gets these fits of temper. It's how he is. He believes I am careless." "Careless with what?" I asked. "With our traditions." Elias said. His voice was a low rumble from the pit of his chest. She forgets the importance of things. She becomes lenient. His eyes were on her then, a look that was not simple anger, but a deeper and more searing judgment, as if she had broken some covenant between them. The traditions haven't kept our stores full for the winter, have they? She said. Sometimes you have to adapt. Be practical. All right, I said, holding up my hands as if to ward off a blow. Look, I can tell you're both passionate people. I'm not here to take sides or to pry into your island ways. I'm only here to make sure disagreements don't become dangerous. Has there been any physical violence? Elias, did you lay a hand on your wife? Never, he said. He looked at me as if the question itself were the offense. I would never harm Alara. And you, Alara? I asked, turning to her. Did you feel threatened? She drew a breath, and her gaze moved from my face to her husband's and back again, as if weighing two different kinds of trouble. He is loud, she said. But other than that, no, Detective. He did not hurt me. Then I am calling it a quarrel that went past its bounds, I said. But I will have to file a minor report. You should know that if we are called back to this house for this reason, the law will take a harder hand. Do you understand? They both gave a short, silent nod. The fury had not left the room, but it had drawn back into the corners. A strange and weary quiet took its place. Elias went to the spot on the floor, and he knelt, and with his great hands began to gather the larger shards of the plate. The woman watched him for a long moment, and a look passed over her face that I could not read. And then she turned and went into the kitchen, and I heard the scrape of a kettle being set upon the stove. I was scratching a note in my book when I felt the weight of his stare. The boy on the stairs had not moved. He sat pale in the gloom and lost inside his clothes. His eyes were like holes burned in a blanket. The argument had taken root in him in a way it had not in his parents. The peace had been made, such as it was. I could take the afternoon ferry back across the water and set the strange accounting of it down on paper. I snapped the book shut and I slipped the weight of it into my coat. The woman Ilara returned from the darkness of the kitchen. She would not meet my eye but looked instead toward her husband as he stood like a beast of burden by the door. Elias, fetch some driftwood for the evening fire, she said, and her voice was not a wife's request but a command given to dismiss him from her sight, so she might offer up some parting lie of peace before sending me from her house. Elias looked at me a final time, and the storm was still in his face, but he gave a curt nod of his head and turned and was gone out the back door into the gray light. When he was gone, it was as if some great weight had been lifted from the low timbers of that house. Thank you for your visit, Detective Harper, Alara said, and her voice was softer now. I am sorry for the trouble. It's no trouble at all, ma'am. I just want to ensure things remain peaceful here, I said, and I moved toward the door. Domestic disputes can be unsettling for everyone, especially children. I turned my head to where the boy still sat on the stairs. Is he doing all right? Finn is a sensitive boy, she said, and she made a gesture with her hand as if shooing a fly, as if his nature were a defect she had learned to abide. He has an active imagination. As I stood on the threshold, I felt a sudden and urgent claim on the hem of my coat. I turned, and the boy was there. He stood behind me with a strange look on his face. He looked past me into the house to where his mother worked by the hearth, and he made sure she was not looking. I need to tell you something, he whispered. I crouched down and looked into his face. What is it, Finn? You can tell me. He leaned to me, and his hand was a small, cold fist clenching the cloth of my jacket. His eyes were wild with a terror that had no place in the heart of a child. They're not fighting about what you think, he whispered. It's about people from the mainland. It's always about them. What about them, Finn? He swallowed, and his gaze flew to the gray and twisted trees. Then he leaned so close his lips were nearly at my ear. My mom and dad, he said. They eat them. They eat people from the mainland. The words landed in the plain air and they meant nothing. The notion of it. Cannibalism? On an island a stone's throw from a modern American town? It was preposterous. It had to be a child's interpretation of something ugly he'd heard. I set the words aside as you would a piece of stone that did not fit the wall you were building. I reached out, and with a gentle pull, I loosened his hand from my coat. I gave him a smile. "Hey, it's all right," I said. "Grown-ups say some pretty scary-sounding things when they're angry, don't they? Sometimes, it sounds like they could eat each other alive. It's just an expression. It doesn't mean it's real. Your parents love you, and they don't eat anyone. I promise." But the boy was not comforted. He looked at me, and his face collapsed into a mask of pure and desolating grief. It was the look of a true believer who has been met with apostasy. The tears stood in his eyes, but did not fall. "No," he whispered. "You don't understand. You don't understand." He turned from me then and fled, his small feet in their socks making no sound on the wood of the floor, and he was gone up the stairs into the shadows of the house. I stood and turned my back. I had done my work here. It was time to leave this quiet desolation and return to the mainland where things could be measured and made sense of. I began to walk, but the boy's whisper went with me. It was a stubborn and unwelcome shadow that the sun could not burn away. The boy's words had planted a seed of disquiet in my mind, and while I told myself that this was a child's fiction born from a house of unhappy truth, reason would not set my heart at ease. I told myself that the human mind will invent monsters to explain the sorrows of the world, for the monsters can be slain. I was halfway to the ferry landing where the gray water lapped at the timbers of the dock when a voice called out to me, a voice rich and warm. "Detective, a moment, if you would be so kind." I turned and saw an old man seated upon a bench that had been hewn from a single great log of driftwood. He had a beard that flowed down his chest, white as sea foam, and his eyes were a startling and brilliant blue. In his hands he held a piece of wood and a small knife, and from the wood he was coaxing the shape of a bird. His smile was not like the other faces I had seen here. It was a true and genuine thing that creased the old map of his face, and it was a thing that could disarm a man before he knew he had been armed. He radiated a calm and settled authority. This was the island's elder. "Good day, sir," I said, and I walked to where he sat. "Detective Alex Harper, you must be Malachi." "Indeed, I am," he replied. His voice was a deep and comforting burr. "And I would guess, from the grim set of your shoulders as you arrived and the slightly less troubled look upon you now, that you have successfully poured oil on the troubled waters at the Vance household." "Something like that," I said. "It seems to have been settled for the time being. Hopefully they'll keep it down from now on." "Elias has a hard head and Alara a sharp tongue," Malachi said, and he chuckled low in his chest as his knife continued its deft and practiced work. "It is an unfortunate pairing of temperaments at times, but their hearts are true to our ways. We are grateful you made the trip, Detective. It relieves me of having to deliver a harsher island judgment." He stopped his work then and looked up at me, and his gaze was both kind and possessed of a deep and knowing power. "But you look weary from your journey. You are already headed back to the mainland, then? What a pity. Well, my work here is done, and..." I let the words fall away, for I would not tell this man that his island had creeped me out. "But your visit is so short," Malachi exclaimed, and a look of true disappointment crossed his face. "You mainlanders are always in such a rush. You never stop to truly see our little world. It truly is a shame, because you arrive on our shores at a most auspicious time. Our annual Harvest Festival is in just 2 days." He said the words Harvest Festival, as if they were a benediction, and his eyes took on a light of deep and holy reverence. "It is the highlight of our year," he said. "A celebration of the sea's bounty, the season's turn. There is music, dancing, a great feast. It is a spectacle I assure you cannot be found anywhere on your side of the water. A real piece of living history." A curiosity rose in me against my better judgment. It was a lure, and I was a fish rising to it. "A festival, you say? I suppose I could stay. I do have a couple of personal days I could take." A beatific smile bloomed upon Malachi's face. "Excellent. I would consider it a personal honor, and a wonderful gesture of goodwill between the perch and the mainland authorities. It shows us you care beyond the matters of law enforcement. Please, Stay as our guest." He pointed with the tip of his knife down a path that led away from the dock. "Old Martha runs a small guest house just off the cove, the Mariner's Rest. She will make you feel right at home. I will inform her to expect you." The offer was warm and heartfelt. It smothered the last of the boy's dark whisper. The elder himself was inviting me. This was the path of reason. This was an offer of peace, an unplanned holiday on an island of strange and simple folk. "All right, Malachi," I said, and I heard myself laugh. "You've convinced me. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine, my boy," he said, and his gaze returned to the wood in his hands, which I could now see was a perfect tiny seagull, wings poised for flight. "You will enjoy yourself. Everyone is so very welcoming to our special guests." An hour later, I stood in a room at the Mariner's Rest. Martha was a woman with kind eyes and hands soft with dough, and she showed me to a room with a bed dressed in a quilt of many colors and a window that looked out upon the sea. I used the guest house telephone and called the precinct and told O'Malley I was taking my days. He grumbled at the wire's other end and spoke a word about me going native, and then he approved it. I unpacked the few poor things I carried in my bag, and I looked out from my window upon the island of Cormorant's Perch. The mist was breaking, and thin shafts of a pale sun descended through the pines. Malachi was right. I had judged this place with a mainlander's prejudice. I had allowed the ravings of a troubled child to color the world with a darkness that was not there. The islanders were not monsters. They were people wedded to their rock and to their old and peculiar ways, and I had been given the chance to witness it. I had set my foot upon a new path, and chose to believe it was a path of my own choosing. I woke to the cries of gulls. At the insistence of Malachi, I was not charged for my lodging or my meals. Old Martha set out before me a breakfast of smoked fish, bread, and coffee. She moved about the kitchen with a solemn sort of care, her attentions not so much of kindness, but as of some duty she was called to perform. "The harvest is a joyous time, detective," she said, and her hand was steady as she refilled my cup. "A time for us to give thanks for the blessings the sea provides us. It is wonderful to have a mainlander here to share in it with us. It's been so long since we've had a guest for the festival." After the meal, I set out to walk the island. The paths were little more than lines scratched into the hide of the land, and they wound through a close press of pine and rock that was the island's heart. For hours I saw no people, and heard nothing but the wind in the high branches and the sound of my own passage. I came at last to the cliffs at the southern edge of the land, a sheer escarpment where the land gave up its claim to the world. Far below, the waves hammered at the rocks, a constant and violent toil. It was a place of a terrible beauty, and the water churned like a great gray mill race of the abyss. Toward midday, I turned back, and a smell drew me to the village, the smell of roasting meat and the far-off sound of some music. The place had come alive with a purpose. They were stringing ribbons of garish color from house to house, and in the center of the square, a great pyre of wood was being raised. Trestle tables of raw timber were set out beside it, long as the feasting tables of old kings. "A good day for a stroll, detective," a man's voice called. He sat on an overturned lobster pot mending a net of deep blue color. I knew him from the docks. "It certainly is," I replied and walked toward him. "Alex Harper." "Oren," he said. He offered me his hand, and the grip of it was hard. "Pleased to have you with us for the harvest. It's only right we show our mainland neighbors our truest selves once in a while." We sat and spoke for the better part of an hour while he worked. He told me stories of storms that had names like gods, and of the old feuds between the fishing families, and of strange fish that they pulled from the deep channels, things with no names on the mainland charts. His talk was filled with the island's traditions, of the hunger of the sea and of the price of its bounty. And I listened as a man listens to the parables of a faith he does not share but finds compelling. Later, I saw a woman named Brenna. She sat weaving a great tapestry, and upon it were the figures of islanders in a boat heaving a great net from a black sea. In the net were other figures, things that had once been men, their limbs set at angles of profound distress. It tells the story of the first harvest, she explained, and her fingers never cease their nimble and practiced dance. How our ancestors learned to receive the gifts from the deep, gifts that keep our people strong and hail through the cold winters. She looked up and gave me a serene and beatific smile. Every festival, we welcome a traveler to share in the tradition, a custom passed down from the beginning to honor the bond between the settled and the adrift. I looked at the grim tableau she was weaving and took it for their sacred history, and a strange thing to celebrate with such an open heart. That evening I ate with Martha and two old sailors whose flesh was too frail for the sea but whose eyes still held the look of it. Martha served a thick dark stew of roots I could not name and a meat she called only island game and would say no more of it. We drank a wine made from berries that grew on the rock, a thing of some potency, and it coursed in the blood like a warm and drowsy poison that smoothed the hard edges of the world. The warmth of these people, the welcome they offered up. It was a constant and disarming tide that pulled at the pilings of my own reason. As I climbed the stair to my room, the world seemed a simple place, and all the sorrows of the mainland were a distant country. I lay in the dark, and from the village came the slow and solemn beat of a drum, a sound like the beating of a great heart. It was the sound of a thing coming to pass, of a rite being prepared. I chose to hear in that sound a song of peace, and let the darkness take me. The morning broke gray and doleful, and the day of the harvest festival arrived under a sky of leaden slate pulled low across the water. The wine of the night before had left a bitter sediment in my blood, and I sought to clear my head with a walk along the shore before the ordained celebrations of the evening began. I chose a different path this time, a track that led toward a cove of which Oren had spoken, a place of rocks and tide pools that the islanders called the boneyard. "It's where the sea gives back what it has taken," he had said, and there was a knowing in his eye I had mistaken for charm. Whale bones, smooth glass, shipwrecked timbers. The path was no path, but a scar through the gorse that descended toward a crescent of black shingle where the sea foamed and fretted. The cove was a sepulchre of driftwood, a tangled ossuary of trees scoured and bleached to a bone whiteness by the salt and sun. I saw where the great rib of a leviathan broke from the sand like the arch of a ruined cathedral. I walked the tide line where the last wave had laid its lace of foam upon the shore. I was soothed by the solemn and rhythmic hammer of the waves, by the cold and absolute solitude of that place. I bent to the shingle to retrieve a stone worn smooth as a palmful of worry when I saw it. It was a shard of unnatural whiteness protruding from the wet and sucking sand. I knelt in the dampness and worked it free with my fingers from the cold earth. It was not a piece of shell, nor of coral. It was the distal phalanx of a human finger. There was no mistaking its morbid and articulate perfection. A coldness that had no source in the sea air entered into me, a chill from some other and more terrible climate. I stood and made to hurl it back into the water, to give it to the sea's forgetting, when I saw the glint of metal upon it, corroded and green from its long slumber in the salt. A circle of baser metal, a cheap and simple wedding band, still clung to the bone. My eyes quartered the beach with a new and terrible attention. They were no longer the eyes of a tourist, but of a hunter, or of the hunted. And in that desolate place there was a New Testament written in the debris, and I began to read. Half hidden in a great clot of rotting net cast high against the cliff was the shattered arch of a human mandible. It was yellowed with age, and a few teeth still clung to their sockets, save for one, which held the dull gleam of an amalgam filling, a small testament of dentistry, and a life lived on the other side of the water. I took a step back from it, and my feet turned on the slick stones. The boy's whisper returned to me, no longer a child's fever dream, but a truth spoken from the heart. They eat people from the mainland. My gaze fell upon the driftwood piles with a dawning horror, and that which I had taken for the ribs of seals or porpoises I now saw with a new and awful clarity to be the staved-in architecture of a human cage. I saw a splintered femur that had been gnawed and broken. These were not skeletons. These were the leavings. This was the offal of a feast. The friendly welcome of the elder Malachi. The hearty parables of Oren. The strange tapestry of Brenna, the weaver with its figures pulled misshapen from the deep. The meat in Martha's stew. A thing with no name, but with a provenance I now understood. All of it came together in my mind. A constellation of terror whose shape was now revealed. This was not a harvest of the sea. It was a harvest of men. I turned from that place of bones and I ran. I clawed my way up the slick embankment, my hands gripping at the thorns of the gorse and at the wet and naked roots of trees, as if they were the hands of saviors held out to me from the living world. I burst from the ravine's edge and did not stop. I ran with the terror of a debased animal back to the false sanctuary of the Mariner's Rest, and a single thing was screaming in the meat of my brain. I must get off this island. I crashed through the guest house door and fled up the stairs. I slammed the door to my room and leaned my back against the wood. My eyes scanned the small confines of my room. One door, one window that gave out onto the square. My training was not made for this. This was a heresy of the flesh, a pagan rite as old as the rocks it was enacted upon. My radio. With hands that would not be still, I retrieved it from my bag. I raised its small antenna and thumbed the switch and pressed it to my ear. There was no squawk of the dispatcher's call. There was nothing. I turned the small black box over in my hands, and I saw it. At the base of the antenna, the wire was severed. A clean and precise cut. Some careful artisan of my doom had been in my room. While Orin filled my ears with his parables of the sea, while Martha set out her stews, while I had walked in my ignorance among the tombs of their making, I walked to the window, and through a crack in the lace I looked down upon the square. The spectacle of the festival was nearly prepared. The pyre stood mountainous in the dusk. The islanders moved about their work with the grim and purposeful industry of acolytes at their devotions. The smiles I had taken for welcome I now saw as the ravenous and serene masks of predators. I saw Malachi directing the final preparations, a high priest in his element. As if he felt the weight of my gaze, he looked up from his duties, and his eyes scanned the windows of the guest house. Our gazes met and held for a long second across that ordained space. He gave me a slow and placid nod. It was a benediction. It was a final and awful amen. For I was not the guest. I was the honored guest. I was the harvest. I remained in that room while the last of the light bled out of the sky. My mind scrabbled at ways to escape. Swim to the mainland? I'd freeze to death. Steal one of their boats? The islanders' boats would be guarded as such upon this holy night. There was nothing but the clothing on my back. My only path forward was to play along. I poured cold and dead water from the pitcher into the basin and put my face in it. In the clouded and weeping glass of the mirror, I saw a ghost looking back. A pale face whose eyes held a terror I knew I must conceal behind some semblance of civility. I coached the pale man in the glass. "You are just a visitor. You are eager for the festival." I descended the stair. Old Martha stood in the gloom of the lobby, polishing glasses. When she saw me, she offered up a smile of such grotesque welcome that it was a thing of surpassing horror. "Ah, Detective Harper, there you are," she said. "I was beginning to worry you would sleep through the commencement feast. You must be hungry. Go on. Join the others in the square. The fire will be lit soon. Find Malachi. He has saved you a seat of honor." I contrived a smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Martha." Outside, the world had been remade by fire. Torches on high staves bled a guttering light onto the scene. The air was heavy with the sacramental odor of pine smoke and the rendering of fat from a massive pit near the fire. The islanders were gathered at long tables of rough-hewn timber, drinking from wooden cups and laughing a laugh that was not a sound of mirth but of a ravenous and primal joy. A knot of men made music on fiddles and drums. I moved through them. Orin clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Almost time, detective. You'll never see another night like this one." Brenna the Weaver smiled at me from the depths of some beatific trance. All of it was an act, and I the guest, for whom this final act was prepared for. I saw Malachi then. He stood like some ghastly pontiff at the head of the main table, a crown of dark ivy on his white hair. He motioned me toward him, and I made my legs obey. "Alexander, my boy," he boomed, gesturing to the seat beside him. I am so delighted you have joined us. I trust your day was illuminating? Very scenic, yes, I managed. Excellent, he said. He turned and raised his cup, and a sudden and profound silence fell upon that place. People of the Perch, we gather tonight for the sacred harvest, as our forebears did, and their forebears before them. We thank the unending sea for the bounty it brings to our shores. A great and terrible baying rose from the assembly, and we thank the drifting souls who find their way here, he continued, and his cold eyes found mine and held them. Who nourish our traditions and give of themselves so that our community may survive another year? The crowd roared, their faces a gallery of feverish and contorted masks in the firelight. They raised their cups to me, all of them, and Malachi turned to me, and in the din his voice was a whisper of venom and benediction for me alone. It is a great honor you provide us, Detective Harper. The greatest honor we can bestow. You are now truly a part of our island's story. Forever. Platters of rendered meat and steaming roots were passed down the long boards of the tables. One was set before me, a charnel bounty piled high upon the plate, and I could not look at it. First, you will eat with us, Malachi said, and his voice was of a silken and dreadful honey, but with a subtext of iron. It is tradition that the guest partakes. They were going to wait until I was full and slow. I picked at the flesh with my fork, and the ghastly ruse was the only thing between my life and the pyre that awaited it. Tell me, Malachi, I said, and I marveled at the steadiness of my own voice as it came forth from my throat. The ceremony itself. When does that happen? What am I to expect? His smile widened. Patience, my boy. After the feast comes the music, then the dance. A spiral dance, winding to the very center of the square. That is where we show our ultimate gratitude. At the foot of the fire, under the moon, my eyes quartered the square. The fire and the torches were the world's only light, and beyond their bleeding circles lay the utter blackness of the cliffs and the docks. It was the only way out of that lit and holy hell. Then came the dispensation for which I had not dared to pray. A man burdened with a roasted leg stumbled, and his platter crashed upon the earth with a wet and greasy clap. A momentary confusion took hold as men rushed to this small ruin, and their bodies formed a brief and chaotic screen between Malachi and myself. My mind surrenders its claim, and my body acted upon its own terrible ordinance. I shoved the great weight of the table and sent Malachi's cup spilling its dark wine across his lap. He sputtered a curse. I was over the bench and into the shadows before the first cry went up. "The guest is leaving!" a woman shrieked. "Don't let him reach the docks!" The frantic music of the feast was strangled in an instant, and in its place there rose a bestial clamor and the percussion of heavy boots upon the hardpan. I ran, as I had not run since I was a boy who feared ghosts in the dark, and now the ghosts were real and at my back. I ran through the warren of lanes, and between the salt-eaten cottages, and their knowledge of the place was offset by the pure and animal fury of my flight. I hid myself behind a stack of cordwood and held my breath as two fishermen passed, their faces limned with a righteous anger, and then I ran again toward the sound and the smell of the sea, the docks. I broke from the last line of the houses and saw the harbor. A few boats sat tied fast in the black water, their familiar forms of no use to me. And then I saw it. Churning slow from the far pier was a light, and I heard the slow and steady systole and diastole of a diesel engine. It was a mainlander's boat, a trawler hugging the dark shore. It was my only hope. There he is, a roar from the blackness behind me. A clot of men bearing torches broke from the village, and at their head was Orin, his face raw, filled with the intent of murderous sacrament. They would be on me before I could reach the pier. I did the only thing that was left to a man in my extremity. I scrambled down the rock face at the harbor's edge, my hands shredded on the shells and the stone. I fell into the water, and the shock of such lethal cold seized the very heart in my chest, and I swam. I put my head down and crawled through the black and frigid water, my strength a coin I spent with every stroke, my arms reaching for that single receding light. The shouts at my back turned to curses, and then to silence. They did not follow. They were content to commend my soul to the sea's cold ministry. The sea did its work. My limbs were things of lead, and my lungs were filled with fire. And as the last of my strength left me, as I prepared to give myself to the deep, my flailing hand struck something hard and unyielding. The hull. A rope ladder hung down its side. With my fingers, I hooked them through the rungs and I pulled myself from the water and came to be on the scaly and reeking deck of the boat. I collapsed and drew air into my lungs in great ragged gasps as the lights of Cormorant's Perch, the lights of that ordained and hellish feast, dwindled to a fading constellation of malevolent light upon the black and endless waters. And I was alive. The fisherman who pulled me from the black water looked upon me as if I were a shade dredged up from the seafloor, a thing not meant to return to the world of men. He gave me a blanket that reeked of fish and salt and the great and abiding rot of the ocean, and pointed the nose of his trawler toward the mainland's distant lights. I offered a broken telling of a boating accident, and he did not question it, for the animal terror in my eyes was a testament older than any words. In the clean and well-lit rooms of the station house, my story sounded like madness. They listened with the concern of men who hear a confession for a sin they cannot comprehend. I gave them my testimony. Finn's whisper, the charnel ground of the cove, the sabotaged radio, my flight from that ordained feast. They sent a Coast Guard chopper to circle that rock. The report came back and said everything was normal. A fishing village. Quiet people. There was no proof. For this evil was a thing that left no proof, only a profound and terrible absence. Sergeant O'Malley was a bull of a man whose faith was in the solidity of the world, and my story was a heresy against his church. Hypothermia. Exhaustion, he declared, his voice a sermon for the bullpen. Couple that with some of their home-brewed poison, and you hallucinated the whole damn thing, Harper. Get a grip. For a week, I sat in that purgatory of paperwork, and every time I closed my eyes, the world dissolved into the gray shingle of the cove, and the pale and horrid glimmer of bone in the sand. Every shadow wore the face of Malachi, his smile, a placid benediction upon my damnation. I was a man who had seen God's monstrous other half, and they called me mad for it. Then, on a morning like any other, the telephone on the main desk rang. I saw O'Malley emerge from his office reading a slip of paper, and his face was a study in irritation. Unbelievable, he said, and he stopped at my desk. Get this. Another domestic complaint from your precious island getaway. Sir? I asked, and I rose from my chair, though my legs were made of straw. Noise complaint. Boyfriend and a girlfriend this time, apparently. Some young couple named Thorne. Just moved over from the mainland 6 months ago, looks like. Neighbor is reporting, yelling, screaming, the whole 9 yards. Standard procedure, he said, turning toward a rookie named Peterson. A boy so young his piety for the badge was still upon him. Peterson, you're up. The air went out of me. Sergeant, no, I said. No, sir, you can't. He turned back and his brows were a furrowed and angry line. Can't what, Harper? Can't do my job? Can't send an officer to a simple public disturbance call? You don't understand, sir. It's a lure. It's not a real dispute, I said, stepping toward him. It's how they do it. It's how they get someone out there. First my call, now this one. Don't you see the pattern? You can't send him. Detective, that is enough, he said. You have your own conspiracy theories. That's fine. Deal with them on your own time. But you will not interfere with police business based on some fever dream you had. Peterson is a capable officer. He doesn't carry your baggage. He gave me a last look of dismissal. Now get back to your desk. He turned his back on me. The sentence was passed. I returned to my place and I watched as Peterson, young and doomed and eager to prove his worth, grabbed the keys to his patrol car. And Peterson, O'Malley called out to him. It's the Perch. No sidearm, just keep the peace. The boy gave a nod full of a terrible and unknowing confidence. He cast a look of pity upon me as he passed, the sane man pitying the seer, and then he walked out into the light of the day. That was 3 days ago. Peterson never activated his radio. The rock has gone mute out there in the gray expanse of the water. He has not come back. and I know with a dreadful and certain gnosis that he never will. The great and terrible wheel has turned, the old blood sacrifice is paid, and the harvest is come again. And I, who had seen the awful workings of the oracle, was now just another soul damned to watch it happen. Story 3. Yep, I'm serious. Go back and reread the title. I'm just as shocked as you probably are. I'm chronicling my story online to maybe give someone else hope, in case they're also stuck in a situation like I was. I'm speaking to a few people directly when I say, are you having the same reoccurring dream? The one that feels way too realistic? It's not just a dream. You have a time limit on your life. Sorry to break the news to you on this. But good news? It's not a death sentence. I beat it. Maybe you can too. To the rest of you, let me fill you in on what I'm talking about. Vivid dreams are the worst, no matter what. You could have a wonderful dream, and when it ends, it frustrates you that it wasn't real. On the other hand, a vivid nightmare sticks with you. Countless husbands have been given the cold shoulder over a dreamed cheating, and many children swear the creature under their bed was right there. But when I tell you my dreams were vivid, please understand that I mean vivid. I can remember the very first night my dreams became vivid. It's not hard to remember what it was like, though they happened in a different place every time. They all followed a very similar pattern. It always started on the street. I was standing on a street, staring at a home. Only, I knew it wasn't me. For one, I was way too tall in my dreams. Normally, I'm an average height guy. But in those dreams, I could tell that I was easily 7 feet tall, based off of doorways and such. After moments of staring, I would then proceed up to the house. Most of the time, I just walked up to the house. If there was a gate, I just hop over it, or scale over a fence if I need to. I never took the front door. Silently, I would creep to just the right window. I always knew which one. They were always unlocked. The room inside was always dark, and there was always one person inside, sleeping soundly. I'd creep towards the bed, and the other indicator that this was not my body made itself apparent. My clawed, pitch-black arm would slither up, out of my control, and towards the person. I wished one of these people would wake up and snap me out of my dream. They never did. I'd extend my claw and lightly tap the person's sternum. Nothing more. What followed was a violent fit from the person in their sleep, as if they were choking or having a heart attack. In the dream, I would stare, motionless, until their ragged, jerky movement ceased. Silence. The dream would fade. I'd awake in a cold sweat. I used to be shook for most of the day, back when it first started. I would have this dream every night. The person I confided to first about these dreams was my closest friend, Ted. For as long as I've known Ted, he's been eccentric, I guess? He works at a local tourist trap as a crocodile handler in order to, as he put it, get on the good side of the reptilians, to show he's one of the humans worth saving. Typical Florida man. I have a hard time breaking down if he's serious most of the time. But surprisingly, he's a good listener. I was hanging out at his house, watching television, as I explained to him what my dreams were like, and he nodded slowly, absorbing the picture. So, in your dreams, you're a tall murder creature that stops people's hearts or something? He clarified. I guess? I don't know, man. The worst part about these dreams is how real they feel. Like I'm actually there. Do you smoke? He asked, with his eyebrow raised at me. No, man. My job would can me if I did. So it couldn't be that. Nah, man. I mean, like, maybe you should. You know, mellow out. He smiled at his own sage advice. You're an idiot. He shrugged. You came to me. That's an error in your judgment. That's fair, I guess. I sighed. Just don't sleep, bro. Problem solved. No dreams if you're not asleep. He tapped his skull. Tried. Caffeine, energy shots, splashing water on my face, whatever. Once it reaches midnight, I crash. no matter how tired I am. Like clockwork. Like, at the same time, no matter what? I nodded. That sucks. You're doomed then, I guess. Sorry about it. He gave a cheeky grin. In all serious though, don't they have like, sleep doctors? Try one of those. You mean sleep therapy? I mulled over his words. I think that's really for people who have trouble sleeping, but I guess it wouldn't hurt. I looked crazy when I set up an appointment for sleep therapy. They ran some sleep tests, and they actually said I get a great night's sleep. The doctor was surprised by my frustration at the results. You want to get less sleep? I remember the confusion in his voice. Yeah, work's very demanding. I need to be able to sleep less, so I have more time to work. It was a terrible lie, but the truth was stupider. That's not really healthy. You need to prioritize a healthy sleep schedule. Okay, right. I got that. There are times that I need less sleep, though. So hypothetically, what could I do on the days that I really need to crunch for work in order to healthily stay up as long as I can? The doctor pinched his brow with his hand and sighed. Keep your mind occupied. Do something that requires you to actively think. No podcasts or television or anything like that. It should be something that requires focus. With his advice, I remember mulling over it for some time. Video games could be a viable option, but that could become costly. To buy new games constantly, or invest in a better computer. I didn't want to invest in a new physical hobby either, like painting, putting money into something I might not even like. Writing? Forget it. Just writing this out is a slog enough. I don't have the imagination or patience to write a book. That's when I stumbled upon someone online geoguessing. For the uninformed, geoguessing is when someone uses an online map to randomly place themselves somewhere on the globe, where they will then guess where they are. The closer they are to being right, the more points they earn. The goal is to be able to locate pretty quickly and accurately exactly where you are on a map. For me, this was perfect. No startup cost, plenty of strategies to learn, and the world is a pretty big place. So there was plenty of variety to keep my mind focused. So, I jumped in. I spent my free time studying how to get better at guessing, and I would spend the late hours of the night honing my skills. The bad news was that I'd still become abnormally tired at 12 o'clock and pass out. The good news, however, was that I was keeping my mind preoccupied with geoguessing beforehand, so while the inevitable still came, I wasn't just staring at the clock, waiting for it to happen. It was a little comfort, I guess. I don't remember how long after I started geoguessing that my breakthrough came. I woke up from another horribly vivid nightmare, and in the stupor of the morning, tried to start my day. Somewhere in between having breakfast and brushing my teeth, the thought hit me. I think I know where that house is. I concentrated, trying to scrap together bits of the vivid dream. I recalled a sticker on a pole outside. The architecture was unique enough, and the short dashed road lines were clear. I laughed out loud to myself, shaking my head. Romania. Did I dream of Romania? It seems so silly. To guess my dream, considering dreams are usually made-up wobbly places in your skull. I tried to dismiss the thought and move about my day, but a tingling feeling in the back of my brain told me I was onto something. By the time my shift at work was over, I instantly hopped on my map app and started searching the streets of Romania. It took about 20 minutes, and when I saw it, I felt my throat dry and my hands clam up. I found it. The house I dreamed about. There was no mistaking it. I'd never seen that house before that day. And yet, the night before, I dreamed I was a large creature, entering that home and killing whoever slept there. It was surreal. It felt impossible. The questions only got worse the more I thought about it. How did I see this? Why was I dreaming this? Was every night a real place? Was every night a real person? Am I watching a real person die every night? I tried to think of logical explanations. I'm dreaming of real places because of all the geoguessing I've done. I probably just forgot I'd seen that house. In the countless places I had guessed, That night, I dreamed again. Another house, further into Romania. Again, I was able to find the home. Night after night, I would dream. And night after night, it was a real place. By the end of the week, I had created a line. Each dot separated by miles, starting in Romania and ending in Hungary. At this point, there was something I had to do to put a final nail in the coffin, so to speak. I know barely anything about Romania and Hungary, but through a process akin to pulling teeth, I was able to scrounge up some news about someone dying in their sleep. I recognized the picture of the man. He was in one of my dreams. I watched his last, sputtering breaths under a long, clawed hand. What do you do when you realize that every night you go to sleep, you're getting a front-row show to someone's murder at the hands of a literal monster? For me, it was disassociate. A lot of ceiling staring. I wasn't exactly in the popular crowd at work, but even the few that would normally talk to me seemed to avoid me that week. Between my sunken eyes and thousand-yard stares, it was hard to imagine why. Now I had answers to some of my previous questions, but these answers only led to more questions, which had enough of a pull to knock me out of my stupor. The big questions at that point were as follows. 1. Why am I seeing this? Why me? 2. What is this thing? I felt like a moron searching up things like, I dream of monsters killing people but real. But cut me some slack. I had just found out that monsters were real. Most of my results were a lot of people telling fake stories, pretending they're real. Imaginative, engaging, but not helpful. Days went by. I was getting nowhere with my research. I continued to geoguess and map this thing's trip, and by that time, it was in the middle of Austria. Finally, my search for answers led me to a pretty off-the-path website, buried a few pages deep in my search engine. It was a forum for people talking about their experiences with sleep paralysis. The part that caught my eye the most was the section about sleep paralysis demons. In hindsight, it made so much sense. People unable to move, feeling a pressure on their chest, often seeing shadowy creatures. This was it. This website was what I was looking for. I quickly made an account and read through as many posts as I could, learning about the types of sleep paralysis demons and seeing if anyone shared a similar experience to me. I was surprised to find just how many different types of sleep paralysis demons there were. Some saw witches, others saw literal devils on their chest, and some saw shadowy men in the corner of their rooms. Whatever they looked like, this forum had surmised that these demons feed off of the fear and energy of their host without killing them. This left me confused. Then why is the demon that I see killing people? Digging a little deeper, I noticed that some people were asking questions about a demon that closely followed what I was seeing. They'd have dreams about other people being killed by some shadowy creature, and they would always see the dream from the perspective of the demon. Every single one of these users eventually stopped posting, which led me to the truth I'd been trying to deny. I was on this thing's list. The geoguessing data I've been keeping all but confirmed it. It moved from Austria to Italy, France, Spain, and now Maine. It had all of the East Coast to get through before it came to my neck of the woods in Florida. But at that point, I knew time was ticking for me. I needed to find a way to stop this thing from coming. Maybe pass it along to someone else. Anything to get me off the hook. I was desperate for answers. So, I sent a private message to the head moderator for the Sleep Paralysis Demon Forum, a user by the name of the Creepypasta. Hey, Creepypasta! Listen, I don't mean to bother you, but I think I have a special demon on my hands, and I wanted to see if maybe you'd have any additional knowledge to help me out. So, my demon. I get dreams from this thing's perspective, and multiple times a week, I dream of this thing killing people. I don't know anything about sleep paralysis demons, and I just wanted to see if you maybe had any suggestions, or knew anything to help me out. About an hour or so later, I got his response. Hey, Sleepless, in Florida. Yeah, I got a suggestion for you. If you have any loved ones, say goodbye to them. If what you're saying is true, you've been targeted by the touch of death itself. I came up with the name. I don't know how to put this lightly, so I won't. You're cooked. Anyone who's ever asked about the same thing you're asking about stops posting, and it probably not because they made friends with the demon. No one's ever killed a sleep paralysis demon before, and there's proof that some out there just kill people. Just go look up Sons if you don't believe me. Sorry about your luck. Thanks for being a member of the forum. I reread his message a few times, letting the words sink in. Sure enough, I did look up Sons. Sudden, unexpected nocturnal death syndrome. I laughed bitterly at the thought. Yeah, I solved the unexpected death part. Turns out it's just a demon that likes to torture you before it kills you. Great. A Nobel Prize was in my grasp. The part of his message that stung the worst was the part about loved ones. My parents were long gone. I had no siblings, and no love interests in my life. A part of me wondered if that's why I was targeted. I was easy prey. I won't lie. I fell into a state of hopelessness. I continued to track the demon's location as it crawled down the east coast. It was a weird feeling, to know that I'm going to die, and at the time, thinking there was nothing I could do about it. The day it all turned around was the day I met up with Ted to say my goodbyes. When I came over, he was out in his backyard, setting up empty cans, gun in hand. Hey Ted, thanks for letting me come over. I really appreciate— Wait, is that a Zune? Ted held up the ugly brown and green device. Course it is. No one tracks outdated tech. And this thing works just fine. I shook my head. All right, whatever. Doesn't matter. I know I've been a little flaky lately, but I was wanting to say goodbye and let you know you can have whatever you want from my house. He paused and raised an eyebrow at me. What? Seems a little out of the blue, don't you think? I simply sighed. My shoulders shuddered. Yeah, well, those dreams I told you about a few weeks ago? Found out I'm being hunted by a demon. It's coming for me soon. Normally, this would get a laugh out of someone, or they'd probably think I'm crazy. Ted, however, just nodded, like we were talking about the weather. How do you know this? All right. I'll try to give you the short version. About 45 minutes later, I wrapped up my explanation. So yeah, it's on the way, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I wanted to give you some closure before it gets here. There was a heavy silence from Ted as he digested my words. Finally, he shrugged. You ain't dead yet. Actually, I think you have the best chance of taking this thing out. Somehow, despite me being the one approaching him with this crazy information, now I was the one flummoxed. Did you zone out on what I was saying, dude? He shook his head. Nope. Heard every word. So your boy's coming to get you. Because you live alone. But you have an advantage that no one else had. You know it's real, and you know where it is. I bet every poor guy who died before you didn't know it was too late until they saw themselves in the eyes of the demon. But you can prepare. Prepare how? I'll be paralyzed. What? You want me to set up some marbles by the window, so at least I can see this thing stumble over before it kills me? Ted laughed. Fun. But no. Answer's pretty simple, bro. He aimed his shotgun at his makeshift target practice and let off a loud shot, bits of can shredding into the air. We shoot it. With a gun. I was frustrated with Ted. Shoot it? Do you hear yourself? Just shoot the demon? Like it's that easy? The guy online said no one has killed one of these before. Yeah, dude. Because no one had knew it was coming before? You think people that were dying to this thing in the Middle Ages were geo-guessing the location of demons? Hell, man. They didn't even know that they should wash their hands. I bet they'd just wake up and say, yep, Pa died in his sleep because his humors were out of whack, or some garbage like that. He held up a shotgun slug. We can make history here. Be the first to bag a demon. Like I said, you ain't dead yet. So let's make a plan to keep it that way. We spent hours going over what could potentially be a way to save me. It felt ridiculous, but Ted was right. I might have been the first person to know where this thing was. It might have been just the knowledge we needed in order to actually do something about it. That night, when I left with a plan, there was still a bit of unease. But at that point, what other option did I have? Each morning, I continued to track where the creature was the night before. Once it reached Georgia, I remember letting Ted know that it was close and that the plan was on. I'll never forget the night I saw my own house in the dream. I was so used to seeing all these different houses, and once inside, the different faces. But here I was, in front of my own home, the cicadas buzzing in the trees on a humid summer night. There was a moment of fear that went through me. What if this doesn't go right? What if this demon linked to my mind and knows what we have planned for it? It was useless to think about these what-ifs at the time. The demon was already in motion. I watched from its eyes as it approached my bedroom window. There, it stared down at me. I was staring at my own self, fast asleep in the bed. I watched the demon's hands grasp the base of the windowsill and slowly creep its way inside. Its eyes were locked onto my sleeping frame the whole time, just as I had hoped. It moved its way to the side of my bed. No sound of footsteps, despite its towering frame. This was it. Do or die. The silence of the room was broken by the simple sound of a shotgun being racked. Ka-chunk. The demon's vision spun, and there, tucked in a corner of the room, was my buddy Ted, with a shotgun at the ready. He smiled. "Buenos dias, you ugly mother." I don't know if it was the sound of the shotgun or the slug hitting the demon directly in the chest that woke me up. But in an instant, my vision shifted from the demon's point of view to my own as I stared at the lumbering nightmare creature in my room. It had a solid shape, though slightly fuzzy at its edges, like when you squint looking at a light. I didn't have much time to sit in bed and admire my new friend. It was time to act. I grabbed the snare on a pole from under the covers. Ted's work let him keep most of his equipment, and quickly looped the snare around this thing's neck to hold it in place for another shot without letting it get near anyone with its hands. I was able to bring the demon down to its knees as it struggled, letting Ted line up a shot directly for its dome. Black tar leaked from the hole in the middle of its chest. "Now, Ted! Now!" Another rack of the shotgun. Another ear-piercing noise as the slug found its mark, tunneling into the faceless head of the large figure. Immediately, its body went slack as more black ooze bubbled from the hole in its head. The large demon collapsed onto the floor with no apparent movement. Ted fired another 3 shots to make sure it wasn't just playing dead. The both of us stared at the body for an hour or so, unmoving, my hand firmly on the snare pole and Ted at the ready to put more lead into the demon. But it didn't move. The fuzzy-edged body laid in a pool of black tar, as still as the night itself. I broke the silence as I heard the birdsong outside, signifying the approach of morning. We just gave an audience one hell of a dream. Ted smiled back. We probably just saved a whole bunch of people, didn't we? I nodded. Probably. Now help me move this thing out back. Don't touch its hands either. Don't know if they're still lethal. We dragged that thing out to my backyard and buried it in a hole we finished digging a week or so earlier. I haven't had a dream since. Story 4. When the Reaper comes for you, don't be afraid. The words of my mother echoed through my head, my heart, my confusion. They were the last words she said to me before she died. My mother, my favorite person in the world, my last living family member, gone. I had tucked her into sleep that night. She had been getting older and less sure of herself. But she was still there. She just had her bad moments. I had left her with a glass of water and crackers on her nightstand, held her hand and smiled as I told her to sleep well. That's when her grip tightened, just slightly, as her eyes looked at me with love and devotion. That's when she uttered the words, "When the Reaper comes for you, don't be afraid," she calmly told me. I nodded at her, feeling the familiar, helpless feeling that always peered at me when she spoke like this. "Okay, Mom, I won't," I said quietly. I kissed her hand and left her bedside. She was asleep before I even shut the lights off. The next morning, she was found on the rocks below the cliffside about a mile from our home. She didn't leave a note, nothing to explain her rash decision. She was just gone. When I cleaned her room that evening, I looked for clues, something, anything, to get a look into her state of mind. The only thing I found was her journal, and I would never invade her privacy. I ate dinner alone. I washed the dishes alone. I sat on the couch, ready to turn on our favorite show, when I paused. I can never watch that show again. Since the moment the officers knocked on my door this morning with the news, I haven't cried once. I've wanted to. I've wanted to scream, cry, throw things against the wall. But I can't. It's like I've shut down. I picture my phone battery slowly lowering and lowering, and then when it gets to 1%, it flashes a few times before dying. Accurate, I said out loud, and then I laughed bitterly. Just then, a box that I was using to organize with fell from the chair I probably shouldn't have placed it on to begin with. Spilling all of its contents on the hardwood, I sighed and picked up everything I could until the last thing caught my eye. Mom's journal. Found you. Sorry, friend. Your keeper is gone now, I said, tossing the book onto the coffee table. I flopped back down on the couch and sighed. What am I going to do? My eyes wandered around the room with my thoughts until they landed on the journal. I pondered. It felt like an invasion of privacy. She was my mom, and I respected her. I don't want to go snooping through her things. But then again, she left me. I have to know why. Please forgive me, Mom, I said out loud, picking the book up before cozying up on the couch. I flipped open the cover, and her name was written in dark blue ink. I traced the words with my fingers, memorizing the letters, before I turned to the first page. I was up all night reading. My alarm sounding from my phone brought me out of my trance. I had already called out of work the next day, but I hadn't turned my alarm off yet. I normally worked the early shift at the hospital, so my alarm was set for 2:30. I silenced the chime and turned back to the book. I was stunned. I read every word, every story, every line. But whoever wrote this couldn't have been my mother. My kind, sweet, selfless mother, who would never hurt a fly and would pay for people's groceries at the store if they looked like they needed a little boost in their day. The woman in this book is cold, heartless, vindictive, angry, and vicious. There was a story about how in grade school, another little girl had the same color ribbons in her braids as my mom. So my mom cut them off short enough that the little girl had to have a pixie cut. Another story about threatening her high school biology teacher with exposing a non-existent affair between them if he didn't pass her in the class. A story about her best friend teasing her about her frizzy hair at said friend's bachelorette party. So my mom slept with the friend's groom the night before the wedding. She didn't regret it. Any of it. The book was an endless train of her worst moments, inked on paper for all of eternity. I flipped through the pages, back to the beginning, hoping I missed something that said the book belonged to someone else that just happened to share my mother's name. I was desperate. But when I flipped to the front, her name still sat there, in her familiar swooped writing. It was hers. My eyes began to well up with tears when I noticed a date inscribed in the bottom corner of the page. But it didn't make sense. It had the date marked as yesterday. How could that be? I jumped large sections in the book searching through it. I made a decent dent in it last night, but still had a ways to go. I skimmed through more stories of her cheating on my father, her keying the car of my second-grade teacher who gave me a bad performance review, her stalking my ex-boyfriend after he broke up with me before prom. Years and years of horrible choices. When I got to the last page, I read the last section very carefully. And lastly, my daughter thinks I am losing my wits. I am not. I have lied to her. Again. She was pulling away from me. She was going to take that job as a traveling nurse and leave me. I couldn't have that. So I have been pretending to slowly lose my mind so she stays with me. That's it. That's the last of it. I dropped the book like it was a hot coal. No. This can't be true. She's sick. She was sick. I looked at the damning book. How I wish I had just burned it when I found it. In my tears and rage, I marched it outside. lighter in hand. I can pretend. I can pretend I didn't see it all. I brought the flame to the cover, waiting for it to catch. 1 second passed. Then 2. The book, still pristine, was untouched. The flame danced around it. In my frustration, I threw the book at the ground. I screamed, putting my face in my hands. The book is now yours. I look up quickly, head whipping back and forth as my breath quickens. I surely imagined it. The book is now yours, the voice repeats. It is a hollow voice, not sounding completely from our world. I turn around to where the voice sounded, and all I saw was the darkness of the tree line. Now! It bellowed. Terror ran up my arms as I quickly picked up the book, confused now. I held it shaking. The book is now yours. Confess to me. The darkness spoke. Confess? Is that what my mother was doing? I opened the book up, and only blank pages greeted me. I flipped back and forth. Nothing remained. No stories of hate, betrayal, viciousness. Just pages ready to be used. When I got to the first page, my breath caught. Instead of my mother's name, my name sat, in blue ink, in my handwriting. The date at the bottom page marked today. I still felt the presence of the voice near me, so I cleared my throat. What am I to confess? I asked the darkness. Whatever has burdened you, big or small, it responded. I nodded, turned, and walked inside the house. Something about its voice made me afraid not to do just that. I went to the desk in the front room and picked up a pen. Sitting down in the chair, I opened the book, ignoring the front page. I began to write, mainly little things. Stealing extra candy in the checkout line, lying to stay home from school, not standing up for kids who were being bullied on the playground. One by one, I wrote down anything I felt guilty about. Granted, nothing seemed so bad after reading my mother's stories, but I wrote them all. After what seemed like an hour, I made my last entry. I have finally accepted a job offer as a traveling nurse. I start in 2 weeks. I was going to put my mother in a nursing home that I felt was better suited to care for her ailing health. I hadn't told her yet. I closed the book, picked it up, and walked back outside. The second I closed the door, the voice spoke to me again. You may meet me where your mother had her final breath, when her fate was decided by the rocks and the waves, it said. I gulped. I didn't want to go back there, ever. But how did this voice know where she died? I had to have an answer, and explanation. Maybe this thing could give me that. I tucked the book under my arm and slowly made my walk to the cliffside. Walking through the woods at night should have frightened me, but I couldn't focus on anything else except my mother right now. The guilt I felt from signing her up for the nursing home was eating me alive the last week, and having to write it down made it even worse in the feelings of betraying my mom. Even though she wasn't actually sick, I'll have to process that later. Once I make it to the cliffside, it appears empty. I see fresh footprints in the dirt from that morning, but the rest of the land is undisturbed. That's when I see it. A cloaked figure is a bit down the path, looking out onto the ocean. He slowly turns towards me as he hears my approach. His hood covers most of his head, but I can just barely make out gray skin, pebbled with texture, and a solemn mouth. His eyes, though, are missing from his face. He extends his hand to me, long, slender fingers and black nails. I shakily hand him the book. He envelops it in his robes and is silent. My hands are shaking so hard that I try to put them in my pockets to stay calm as I ask my question. Why didn't she tell me she wanted to die? I asked quietly. The figure didn't move. It seemed like an eternity passed before his words came. Because it wasn't what she chose. The fates chose for her, he said. I was stunned. How could something else have chosen that for her? I have accepted your confessions, the figure said. And now you must choose. What do I have to choose? I asked, eyeing the edge of the cliffside. You can either give me a name, any name of someone you want to take your place. They will die for your sins, and you walk away. Or you can jump off this very cliffside into the dark water and see if you survive. Your choice. What? There are rocks down there? It's obvious I would die, I shouted. Oh, yes, I see. That's where your confessions come to play. If the fates have decided you are a good person and deserve to live, they will adjust the water level so you won't hit the rocks. If they decide you are bad, you will die. So you have to decide, dear, if you believe you are good or bad. His haunting voice drawled out the last word. How could I make this choice? I believe I'm good, but I am far from perfect. What would the fates make of me? I looked towards the edge, but I couldn't wish pain on someone else. I couldn't. That would be horrible to try to condemn someone to any suffering. My mother must have felt the same way. She must have. I will jump, I say calmly. I will jump and spare anyone more pain, except potentially myself. I walk to the edge of the cliffside and look down. My heart is racing, but I am trying to stay as calm as I can. As calm as I'm sure my mother was. Are you sure of your decision? The voice asked me. Yes, I want to make the same choice as my mom, I said, watching the waves crash over the rocks far, far below my feet. That is not what your mother chose, the voice behind me crooned. I looked over my shoulder. Yes, it is. How did she die on these very rocks then? I asked. She gave a name, then turned to run. She tripped over her slippers and fell backwards to her death. He stated, Oh my, oh. I clutched my heart as I looked down at the water. Because there was an error that occurred in her ceremony, I had to remake some rules. Her life was still given, so I chose to offer an additional choice to you. I held up my bargain, I always do, he said intensely. My head was still reeling from the new information on her death. I didn't hear what was so obviously stated. No, she wouldn't. She gave a name? Who would she do that to? I asked, facing the figure completely. Yours, my dear. She said yours, he said. The horror on my face was painful. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Why would she wouldn't... Then a sound escaped me, and my cheeks felt wet. I was crying. After everything today, I finally shed tears over my mother's final betrayal to me, her daughter, and I knew in that moment I could never do the same to someone else. I solemnly turned back towards the cliffside, closed my eyes, and leapt. The tears continued as I was falling. Then I let the sobs take over. I didn't care about my fate. I cared that the one person in my life who I loved has betrayed me in the most horrible way. I cared that my mother, my good and kind mother, wasn't the angel I thought she was, and I hated that I still loved her. As the waves neared my face, I took a final breath in and squeezed my eyes shut. The welcoming of the water enveloped me. The Reaper came for me, and I was not afraid. Story 5. For as long as I can remember, my dad owned a local deli that everyone loved. Growing up in that shop supplied me with many memories, and eventually, when I turned 16, he allowed me to work as an employee after school. This is when I noticed that the business was starting to go under, which caused my dad a lot of stress. 2 years later, after graduation, I decided to work full-time for my dad so I could try and help save his deli. He admitted to me it would most likely be the last year he would be able to stay open, and it broke my heart. For months, I tried to bring in more people, but it seemed only the loyal regulars were stopping in. One of these regulars, Leo, was an old man who always came in every weekday at noon for a sandwich, a slice of cake, and a milkshake. I had to break the news to him. Hey, kiddo, Leo belted out as he came into the store, triggering the bell chime to ring. I'll take the usual, darling. As a girl, I honestly hated when men called me darling, but Leo was sweet and innocent, and I knew he was from a different time. Hey, old man, I said in response. You know the drill, $12, I said as I held out my fingers in the shape of a gun. Leo and I had a fun relationship. Hell, he practically helped raise me as he was a regular at the shop ever since I could remember. Leo paid me and gave me the usual $2 tip, but he could sense something was off. Everything okay, darling? Leo asked as he took his stuff to the closest table. You seem off. Yeah, everything is... I stopped. No, Leo, we're not doing good. This will probably be the last year we can stay open, Dad said. Leo took a second and took his hat off, rubbing his forehead before apologizing. But where will I get my snarky conversation while I eat lunch? Leo asked, as his frown started to invert, which ultimately made mine go away as well. Leo stayed a little longer that day as he was leaving for a week for vacation, and we had a great back and forth. He told me he would try and come up with a solution for us, as he used to work for a food distributor before retirement. But I told him to save his effort, as my stubborn father would never switch suppliers before. With that, he left the deli, and I finished up all my work before closing the shop. I had a horrible habit of leaving the front door unlocked as I closed up, which would prompt a few passerbys to come in, as there was a bar just a couple buildings down. But on this particular night, someone else came in, and he honestly scared me half to death based on his appearance alone. The man was very tall and heavy, and wore a black cape with a top hat. He had long, slicked-back red hair, a curly mustache to match it. He wore heavy eyeliner and had a long, pointed nose. I don't mean to bother, I know you're closing up, but do you mind if I have a word? He asked as he held out his hand. My name is Spiros. Please, sir, but I need to close up. I'm sorry, do you mind? I said, but was then cut off. I know you are having financial issues here, and... Well, he said, until I cut him off this time. Sir, please, Leah. Wait, did Leo send you? I asked as I realized he may have sent this man. Sure, yeah, Leo. Are you the owner, or are your parents around? Spiros asked as he walked towards a table. I then called for my dad, who came out of the back, hesitant to give this man his time. After slipping my dad a small piece of paper, maybe a check, he told me to go home and he would finish the close. Spiros stood up to bow to me, which made me feel very weird. After going home, I was drained from the day and I fell asleep fast. When I woke up, I realized my father never came home, which concerned me deeply. His cell phone was dead, so I rushed to the shop even though we weren't open for another 3 hours. Inside, I was relieved to find my father unloading new product onto shelves, into the coolers, freezers. Virtually everything had been tossed out for these new products and supplies, which all hosted a strange logo. Hey, hun, do you mind finishing taking the boxes out? We have a lot to go over before we open the shop, my dad said as he lifted a large box into the cooler. Sure, Dad. But what is all this stuff? I then asked. I struck a deal with Mr. Spiros last night and, well, let's just say we have a new supplier, he said as he started to lift another large box into the cooler. Wow. Kudos to old man Leo, I thought. I went to start helping with the boxes when I noticed a large packet on the counter that basically said, Welcome to the EXP, EOD project by ESTR Foods, and thank you for choosing them as our supplier, and then went on to display important information within the packet and for owners' eyes only. I was very curious about who this new supplier was and caught that weird logo again. This time, noticing it looked a lot like an old Celtic rune or something. As I brought the boxes out to the dumpster, I saw a homeless man going through it, looking for food. Sorry, I'll leave, the man said as I came up to him. No, you're fine. Take anything you can find, please. I'd grab you something from inside, but we're not open yet, I said to him. I had a soft spot for those in need. Thank you, ma'am. I'm Carl, by the way, he said as he took his small bag of yesterday's food. There wasn't much salvageable, but thank you, ma'am. Come back tonight and I'll have some food for you, okay? I said as he started to walk away. No, ma'am. I don't take handouts. I can come grab what I need around midnight after you guys close. That's the time I usually come here. Thank you, though, he said as he walked off. I felt bad, but he wouldn't let me help him. As I made my way back inside, I helped my dad finish up arranging the new product, and he then sat me down, packet in hand. The packet went over the new food that consisted of everything we already served, but a huge disclaimer was slapped on nearly every single page. Do not save any food overnight. Everything has an expiration. End of day. The packet was full of this disclaimer, and my dad warned me that Spiros said this was the #1 rule we needed to abide by with this new product. I asked him why, but even he didn't know. So I had assumed the things were made with no preservatives, and it just did not hold overnight, no matter what it was. That's when we flipped to the page that explained even product used to create the foods would have to be thrown out at the end of the day. That meant condiments, sauces, soups, you name it, it had to be thrown away. No exceptions. We then prepared the store for open, but did not expect the number of customers that day. It had to be hundreds. Everyone dying to try our new food, and everyone loved it. We were forced to close early due to running out of items, and my dad couldn't have looked happier. "We're going to need some help if every day is like this," my dad said as he finished mopping the floor. "We made so much money today, we're already digging ourselves out of the hole this place was in." "Yeah, Dad. Nice job making that deal," I replied, getting everything together to throw out. I made Carl a bag of goodies, despite his request not to, and placed it by the dumpster for him. "Remember, hun, nothing's saved. Everything must go," my dad said as I gave him the thumbs up that I knew. I didn't even think about it. I knew the #1 rule to not save anything, but had no insight to telling Carl not to eat anything from our dumpster. I forgot he made his moves after midnight, and I honestly just simply forgot. I left for the night feeling accomplished, and my dad kept thanking the heavens for sending Spiros to them. We always drove separately. He liked to get there earlier than I, but he never came home again. When I woke up, I chalked it up to his excitement and made my way into the shop when I saw crows pecking a pile of trash outside the dumpster. After parking and making my way over, I realized it wasn't just a pile of trash. The birds scattered as I came closer, and I saw Carl laying there, skinless with his eyes dangling down out of their sockets. I screamed and called the police as my dad came rushing out, still wearing clothes from 2 days ago. It then hit me. Carl must have came after midnight, making it the next day, and ate whatever I had left him. EXP. EOD. Story 6. What am I even looking at here? I whispered to myself. The soft clicking of my sedan's turn signal chirped in my ear, and my fingers tapped against the steering wheel with an impatient rhythm. I turned away and attempted to keep my eyes fixed forward. Despite my best efforts, though, I found my gaze drifting from the reddish glow of the stoplight to the reddish glow emanating from the truck. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the enormous glass cargo hold, struggling to imagine what the purpose of such a thing could even be. There was movement inside of it, too. Some internal light fixture illuminated the people walking about the truck bed. Initially, I couldn't tell what they were doing. A red curtain draped against the inside of the glass obscured my view. Multiple human-shaped shadows flickered behind the curtain, pacing up and down the length of the 18-wheeler like a group of anxiety-riddled stagehands preparing for Act 1 of a play on opening night. Obviously, the thought was absurd. It was 3:53 in the morning. Main Street was appropriately deserted. Just me and the truck, no other vehicles in sight. Who the hell would they even be performing for? Icy sweat beaded on my forehead. I cranked the AC to its highest setting. Some combination of exhaustion from my night shift and the uncanny sight was making my heart palpitate. Then, they pulled back the curtain. It was a devastatingly familiar scene. My breath came out in ragged gasps. Hot nausea creeped up the back of throat. The shining steel table. Honeycombed overhead lights like monstrous bug eyes. Drills. Scalpels. Monitors with video feeds displaying the table from every conceivable angle. Away from the table, a flock of subordinates, attired in sterile gowns and powdered gloves, remained still. They waited for their leader's command. He was impossibly tall, hunching slightly forward to prevent his head from grazing the top of the hollow container. As if to further delineate his rank, the leader's smock was leathery and skin-toned. Everyone else's was white and cleanly pressed. Between the mask covering his mouth and the glare from the light affixed to his glasses, I couldn't see his face. He lumbered toward the table, fingers wrapped around the handles of a wheelchair. The person in the wheelchair was unconscious. A young man with a mop of frizzy brown hair, naked as the day he was born. His head was dead weight. Rolling across his chest, he creaked forward, inch by tortuous inch. Despite his ragdoll body, I knew his awake. Even if I couldn't see them, I knew there was life in his eyes. He just couldn't move his body. Still, They were going to perform a surgery on the poor sap. I looked away. The traffic light was still red. I glanced at the clock. 4:01 a.m. Without a second thought, my boot crashed onto the accelerator. I sped down Main Street. The truck became smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror until it was just a dot of light on the horizon. A wave of relief swept down my spine, but an intrusive thought soured my respite. They've likely started operating, and he can feel everything. The ripping of skin, the oozing of blood. His nerves are screaming. He just can't say anything. "I'm sorry, Pete. Run that by me again? What was so wrong with the truck?" James asked, rubbing his temple like he had a migraine coming on. I tore off a sheet from a nearby paper towel roll and reached over our kitchen island. "You're dripping again, bud," I remarked. James cocked his head at me, then looked to the wipe. He couldn't feel the mucus dripping from the corner of his right eye, apparently. It took a few seconds for him to process the statement. Recognition flashed across his face. "Oh, shoot." He grabbed the paper towel and blotted away the gelatinous teardrop, a side effect from the LASIK procedure that he had underwent a month prior. Overall, I agreed with him. James looked better without glasses. That said, if attention from the opposite sex was the name of the game, the persistent ocular discharge that he now suffered from seemed like a bit of monkey's paw. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. He didn't seem overly preoccupied with the issue. As he crumpled the paper towel, I tried explaining what happened the night before. For the 3rd time, I'm driving home from a shift, idling at a stoplight, and this truck pulls up beside me. One of those big motherfuckers. Cargo hold the size of our apartment, monster truck wheels. You get the idea. But the cargo hold, it's this huge glass box. There's a curtain on the inside, like they were about to debut a mobile rendition of Hamlet. But the people inside of the box, I forgot to mention the people, they weren't about to perform a play. I mean, I don't know for sure that they weren't, but that's besides the point. They looked like they were going to, and I know how this sounds, but they looked like they were going to perform surgery. My recollection of the event crumbled. I was losing the plot. Found myself distracted by James. Now, both sides were leaking. I ripped another piece of paper towel off the roll and handed it to him. He was watching me, but his expression was vacant. The lights were on behind his eyes, but nobody seemed to be home. I started to wonder if he'd discontinued his ADHD meds or something. After an uncomfortable pause, he realized why I was giving him more tissue paper. "So, what was so wrong with the truck?" he repeated, once again blotting the tears away. About a week passed before I saw the truck again. That time, it was all happening in broad daylight. I rounded a corner onto Main Street and parked my car in front of our local coffee shop, pining for my afternoon bolus of caffeine to prepare for another grueling night shift. As I placed my hand over the cafe's doorknob, I heard a familiar jingling noise behind me. The rattling of change against the inside of a plastic cup. A pang of guilt curled around my heart like a hungry python. I'd walked past Danny like he didn't even exist. I flipped around, digging through my pockets for a few loose bills. "Sorry about that, bud. Can't seem to find the way out of my own head today." Danny smiled, revealing a mouth only half filled with teeth. I'd known him for as long as I'd lived in town, give or take 2 years. Didn't know much about him, though. I wasn't aware why he was homeless, nor was I clued in as to why he never spoke. Say what you want about Danny, but it's hard to deny that the man was a curiosity. He didn't fit nicely into any particular archetype, I suppose. His beard was wild and his dentition was a nightmare, but the odd camo-colored jumpsuits he sported never smelled too bad. He was mute, but he didn't appear to have any other severe mental health issues. No obvious ones, anyway. He always appeared content even though he lived on the street, begging for change. A man of inherent contradictions, silently loitering on a bench in front of the cafe, day in and day out. I liked him. There was something hopeful lingering behind his existence. Gave him what I had to spare when I went for coffee most days. As I dropped the crumpled $5 bill into his cup, I saw it passing behind him. The truck was moving about 15 miles an hour, but that did not seem to bother them. The leader didn't struggle to keep his balance as he toiled away, both hands inside his patient. The table and the tools in the crash cart didn't shift around from the momentum. It was difficult to determine exactly what procedure they were performing. The monitors and their video feeds were pointed towards the operation. Yes, but they were so zoomed in that it was nearly impossible to orient myself to what I was seeing. An incomprehensible mess of gleaming viscera, soggy, red, and pulsing. Best guess? They were rooting around in someone's abdomen. Now, I'm a pretty reserved person. My ex-wife described me as conflict avoidant to our marriage counselor. But the raw surprise of seeing that truck and the accompanying gore broke my normal pattern of behavior. Really lit a fire under my ass. Hey, what the hell do you all think you're doing? There's an elementary school a block over, for Christ's sake, I shouted, jogging after the truck. With its hazard lights flashing, the vehicle started to pull over to the side of the road. I had almost caught up to it when I heard the pounding of fast, heavy footsteps behind me. Danny slowed his pace, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, and began speaking. His voice was low and raspy, like his vocal cords were fighting to make sound through a thick layer of rust. He didn't really say anything either. Or, more accurately, what he was saying had no meaning. Well, yes, and you see that? On and on and on. In retrospect, I realized that wasn't the point. Danny wasn't talking to relay a message. No, he was just pretending to be embroiled in conversation, and he wanted me to play along. With his arm wrapped around my shoulder, he forcefully pushed my cheek with his fingers, turning my head so my eyes would face him, and not the truck. I didn't intend to play along. I was still fuming about the gruesome display, aiming to give the perpetrators a piece of my mind. But the entire sequence of events was so disarmingly strange that my brain just ended up short-circuiting. So, I played along. The look of raw dread behind Danny's eyes convinced me to help maintain the charade of a conversation, even if I didn't understand why it was so important. I suppressed my anger and walked alongside him until we reached the nearest alleyway. He started turning into it, so I followed suit. I caught a glimpse of the parked truck as we pivoted. They were no longer operating. Instead, they were all clustered in a corner, staring intently at us, the leader's skin-toned smock and gaunt body towering above the rest of the group. As soon as we were out of view, Danny dropped the act. He doubled over, hyperventilating, hand pushed into the brick of the adjacent building to keep him from falling over completely. "What the fuck is going on?" I whispered. The man's breathing began to regulate. My voice grew louder. "What the hell kind of surgery are they doing in there?" Danny shot up and put a finger to his lips to shush me. I acquiesced, stayed silent, and waited. Once it was clear that I wasn't going to start yelling at him again, he pulled the $5 bill I'd just given him from one pocket and a cheap ballpoint pen from the other. The man rolled the bill against the brick wall and furiously scribbled a message. He then folded it neatly, placed it on his palm, and offered it to me. Reluctantly, I took the money back. He muttered the word sorry, and then ran further into the alleyway. I didn't give chase. Instead, I uncrumpled the bill and read his message. Danny's erratic handwriting conveyed a series of fragmented warnings. "It looks different for everyone. If you react, they can tell you're uninhabited. Once they're sure, that's when they take you. They chose brown for their larvae. Brown is the most common. You need to leave town tonight." The next afternoon, I discovered Danny's usual bench concerningly unoccupied. But the truck was there, parked right outside the cafe. New patient, new surgery. I trusted Danny was onto something, but I didn't heed his advice and leave town. Not right away. It was nearly impossible to pretend they weren't there, especially once they started driving around my neighborhood at night. I could faintly hear the whirring of drills above the grumbling engine, intermittently passing by my bedroom window. They didn't just plant themselves right outside my front door, thankfully. They still did their rounds, their patrol. But it felt like they'd taken a special interest in me. Maybe I was a unique case to them. They weren't completely confident I could see them. I'm sure it was pretty cut and dry most of the time. Danny's intervention had put me in a nebulous middle ground. Maybe I did see them that day. Or maybe I was just having a heated conversation with Danny. Thus, they increased the pressure. Either I'd crack, or I wouldn't. I came pretty close. You see, it wasn't just the sheer absurdity of it all that was getting to me. The stimuli felt targeted, catered to my very specific set of traumas. I suppose that probably yields the best results. Which brings me to this. Have you ever heard of a condition called anesthesia awareness? It's the fancy name for the concept of maintaining consciousness during a surgery instead of falling asleep. All things considered, it's a fairly common phenomenon. One for every 15,000 operations or so. For most, it's only a blip, a fleeting lucidity, a quick flash of awareness, and then they're back under. For most, it's painless. Even without pain, it's still pretty terrifying. Paralytics are a devilish breed of pharmacology. Complete and utter muscular shutdown without touching the brain's ability to think and perceive. Immurement within the confines of your own flesh. To me, there isn't a purer vision of hell. That said, I'm fairly biased, because I'm not like most. I was awake for the entirety of my appendectomy, and I felt every single thing. Sure, they saved my life. I was on death's door. My appendix detonated like a grenade inside my abdominal cavity. But I mean, at what cost? The first incision was the worst. I won't bother describing the pain. The sensation was immeasurable, completely off the scale, and I couldn't do a goddamn thing about it. They dug around in my torso for nearly 2 hours, exhuming the infected appendix and cleaning up the damage it had already done, cauterizing my bleeding intestines. I sort of accumulated to the pain. I never accumulated to the smell. About halfway through, I even managed to kick my foot. Just once, and it wasn't much. It had taken nuclear levels of energy and willpower to manifest that tiny movement through the effects of the paralytic. A nurse mentioned the kick to the surgeon. Want to know what he said in response? Noted. I've been hoping the truck would give up at some point and just move on. It wasn't a great plan, but I didn't exactly have the money to skip town and start a life somewhere else. What transpired this afternoon changed my opinion on the matter. When I stopped by the coffee shop, the truck was there, per my new normal. I'd considered completely altering my routine to avoid them. But if the safest thing to do was to pretend they weren't there, wouldn't that be suspicious? As I was walking out with my drink, doing my absolute damnedest to act casual, I saw who was on the operating table today. It may not have actually been him, of course. It could have just been an escalation on their part. A sharper piece of stimuli in order to finally elicit a reaction from me. To their credit, witnessing Danny being cut into did make me flinch. I'm not sure how obvious it was. When I got back to my sedan, I didn't head to work. I returned home to retrieve a couple of necessities. Primarily, family photos and my revolver. Wanted to say goodbye to James as well. He wasn't expecting me home so soon. They weren't expecting me home so soon. I threw open the front door to our apartment, and there he was, propped up on the couch, motionless, trails of mucus across his cheeks, all the way down to the collar of his shirt. Eyeless. No blood anywhere. I heard them before I saw them. They emit this deep gurgling sound when threatened. It's not loud, but it's hard to miss. Then, one came into view. Guess it had been scaling the back of the couch when I walked in. Honestly, it resembled an oversized caterpillar, pale, segmented, scrunching its body as it moved. But it was as big as a sausage link. Its tail was distinctive, tapering off like a wasp's belly until the very end, at which point it abruptly expanded and became spherical with colored markings. From behind, it looked like an eyeball with a hazel-colored iris. Danny called them larvae. I suppose that's a good fit. I'm assuming they can't communicate with their hive mind until they're fully grown. Otherwise, why wouldn't James have alerted them to my lack of inhabitation? Initially, I thought it was crawling back into James, headfirst into his eye socket so its tail could snugly lay where his eye should have been. It completely passed him by, though, slithered down from the couch and onto the floor. The larva was crawling towards me, I think. I didn't stick around to find out. Honestly, I'm starting to believe most people are already inhabited. For those among you who aren't, I don't know what the inside of the truck will look like when it gets to you, but it'll be something that's designed to get your attention. Your best bet is to not respond. Be like me on the operating table. No matter how terrible it is, no matter how painful it feels, no matter how loud your body screams for you to intervene, just don't react. Story 7. So I was finally at my desk, staring at the blank paper. Eddie had been pestering me every single day for part 2 of that ghost story I wrote for his publication. I told him that I was working on it. Of course, I'd been lying. There hadn't been a day I didn't seriously consider quitting writing since the day I wrote for him. Tiring work, endless deadlines, and articles you don't even want to write, but have to, for the sake of engagement. And then the story you put your heart into doesn't even get noticed, and the publication decides to drop it. This isn't what I wanted to do as a writer. Anyway, now that Jessica's at her mother's, I could finally work on the story. So here I was, trying to think of something to write. My chain of thought was broken by a shrill creak from the kitchen. I glanced toward the hallway, unsure. The house was supposed to be empty. Jessica had left an hour ago. I dropped her off myself. I sighed, pushing my chair back. What now? Can I ever get a break? As I reached the kitchen doorway, I stopped. I saw a woman, with her back turned to me. I froze. My mouth went dry. Jessica? She didn't turn. But you'd already left, I said. What are you doing here? I'm doing the dishes, dear. I just ate a custard tart. Still her back toward me. But I dropped you off. I took a cab back home. I felt like having a custard tart. Aren't you going to miss your train? A pause. Hey, Alan, don't you want a custard tart? What's she up to? She'd been wanting to visit her mother for the past 6 months. And now, she comes back. For a custard tart? Tell me, Jess, are you okay? She giggled. Why, yes, dear. You want this. It's delicious. No? I'm all right. And I think you should leave. Your mom must be waiting. She was humming a tune I didn't recognize. No one's waiting for me. What? Alan, do you remember when we met for the first time? I stayed silent. You used to stalk me around the campus, like a bug. I used to like that too. Of course I remember all of that. But why are you bringing it up now? I miss those times. When you'd sneak into the dorm lounge just to leave flowers on my desk. When I'd wait up late to bake something sweet for you. Your favorite custard tart. You always said it reminded you of home. Dead silence. I still think about that night, Alan. There was a sharp change in her voice, like 2 people speaking together. I had almost drowned in the pool. What would have happened if you didn't save me that day? My heart skipped a beat. Jess, what are you saying? You love me, dear, don't you? Her voice calmed again. Of course I do. Then why are you hiding things from me lately? But I'm not hiding anything. The shrill voice returned. Don't lie. I took a step back. You didn't tell me about your rejection letter from the Urquhart Tales. The one you really cared about, she whispered. How do you... I know, Alan. Maybe it's good to look back once in a while. Do you remember the last time we really had a conversation? I didn't have an answer. You've been working a lot, Alan. Take some rest. Here, eat something sweet. She turned, just a little. Enough for a glimpse of her face. Almost Jessica, but off. Her skin pale, like she'd been sitting in the fridge beside that custard tart. Jess, look at me. I'm looking at you. But she was still turned away. I took a breath. She whispered now, almost singing. Don't you want to taste it? It's your favorite. My phone rang. Sudden. Sharp. I nearly dropped it, pulling it from my pocket. I froze. Looking at the number, she tilted her head. Take it, dear. Sounds like someone who cares about you. I picked up the call. Hello? Her voice was cheery, warm, and distant, but clear. Hey, honey, I reached here safely. I'll be staying for the night. There's a custard tart left for you in the fridge. Take care.